All right, Melody, if you want to take over, this is Melody Strong. The discussion is cultural appropriation.
Hi, good evening, everyone. Melody
Hi.
Strong here from Northeast Minneapolis. I'm in my studio today. So yeah, I'm in charge of leading a discussion about cultural appropriation. So I have some slides prepared just to guide the conversation a little bit. So I'm gonna go ahead and share the screen. Hopefully everyone can see that. There's just a white slide. So just to tell you a little bit about myself, if you're not familiar with my work, this was a piece I had created for my show I had a couple years ago called Líneas de Sangre. So for those of you that might not know, my background, my cultural ethnic background is my mom is from Peru, South America, and my dad is from Brooklyn Center, Minnesota. So I consider myself a Minneruvian. So because I'm very strongly raised as a Peruvian, also very strongly raised as a Minnesotan. My dad was a very proud Minnesotan, so I have a very good merge of those two cultures, I think, embedded in me. So I created two flags for the show. One flag was the Minnesota flag, and I had replaced the old emblem that we know now has been redesigned, but the old emblem I replaced with Machu Picchu instead of the farmer scene that was in it before. And then I put, instead of Minnesota, it says Minneruvian on the bottom. My son currently has that piece hanging up in his apartment in Florida. But this was the second flag that I had made. And both of them are called, well, this one's called I Pledge Allegiance one, and the one he has is I Pledge Allegiance to. And this, I just created the flag from a Peruvian textile. And it's I sewed the ribbon for the white stripes and replaced the stars with pretty typical Peruvian iconography that you find on like textiles and ceramic pieces from both historical context and contemporary work. So I'm also a muralist. That's what most people know me for. And I picked these two murals in particular to show because, they're culturally appropriated. This mural was created with I'm blanking on the name now of Little Earth. Good geez, Louise. So I collaborated with kind of young adults, teenagers from Little Earth, and we created this mural. And actually, as we were processing what we wanted to show on this mural, and it's on the Greenway, by the way, which is a biking trail along Lake Street in South Minneapolis. We really, I after talking to the girls, or mainly all, it was all girls that participated in the project. I really wanted just represented them. So we talked about their clans and their cultural backgrounds and how they identify within their own native culture, and we incorporated that into the message of the piece. So the three main girls who showed up for all the planning sessions, painting sessions, brainstorm sessions, they're the three faces that are on the mural. And then we just included other things that I won't get into too much here, but just kind of wanted to show that I work with this constantly in my practice. So and then this is a mural I created with a lot of cultural appropriation on Lake Street in Chicago, right in front of Midtown Global Market on the Hamdi restaurant. And the property owner really wanted me to represent not all the cultures, but a good portion of the cultures, or a good representation of the cultures of that neighborhood and that surrounding area, especially Midtown Global Market in particular. So I did a lot of walking around in the market to pick up like patterns and colors and things that I would want to appropriate into this mural. And I showed various cultures, and I kind of made connections to different things, having a lot of conversations with a lot of different groups just to make sure the research that I do not only is like stuff that I read and I go look at things, but I interview people. I'd rather learn from a source of people, like especially around there, or like friends and family that I have of these various cultures. I like to connect with them just to find out like what's appropriate, what would be great, what would be representative of, you know, this kind of modge podge of culture in one image. So I've gotten pretty good feedback from this mural in general from the public and from a lot of the cultures. So I just kind of want to show you a little bit about my work and where I'm kind of coming from and probably why Kelly felt it was appropriate for me to lead this sort of discussion. So this is the outline that I have planned for our discussion today. Just kind of give some historical context. I know most of us that are online right now consider ourselves acting artists. So the historical context will probably be just like, oh yeah, I already know this stuff. But I always, as a teacher, I always like to make sure that I'm covering some background information just to make sure that we're all kind of on the same page. So some of this might be even just review of something you already know, or maybe something you might not know, but I always just like to start at a place where we're all on even ground before I move forward into talking about things. So I'm just going to give a little historical context to appropriation in general, and then talk about some contemporary examples of both kind of good and bad. And then throughout, I'll be asking prompting questions for us to kind of talk about in between some of these slides. And then at the very end, if there's anything in particular you want to expand on or discuss further, we can certainly do that and hold space for that. So historical context, before we move forward, if you want to just put in the chat, who or what do you think has been appropriated the most in art? So just like a person or a thing, something that you know of that you can think off the top of your head, like first thing comes to mind, what's probably the most appropriated image of a thing or person that's been used in art? And you can just put it in the chat. And then Kelly, I'm not able to, I don't know how to get to the chat from this
Yeah,
program.
I'll read
So
it.
you might have. Oh, maybe I can get to it.
Okay, I'll just start reading
Did
them. Or did you want to wait? You can see them, or do you want me to read them?
did we get everybody?
Oh, people
I
still.
think we got everybody. These are all really good though. I don't know if you guys are scrolling through the chat. I don't actually know the answer. I just threw it out there for us to think about that. I think we're all on the same page. Like a lot of these things I can see us using the most, like American flag. That was a good one, Margot. I think that one has been used a lot. Mona Lisa. So, you know, I kind of gave away one of the people or the icons that we'll probably talk about a lot here for the beginning part is the Mona Lisa. There's also another one we'll get into in a little bit that I feel like has been used a lot too, but so yeah, does anyone know who did this work here with Mona Lisa? You can just yell it out.
Should we know?
It's Andy Warhol.
I was gonna say that. Too.
Yeah, this Andy Warhol appropriated the image of Mona Lisa for this piece. So
He got away
alrighty.
with that, huh? Because there's no copyright back in the day of paintings, or what?
Yeah, probably. Well, we'll kind of talk about that too. I actually looked up like the copyright law. So I'm going to get into that in just a little bit. When it's like, what is it called? Like not infinite domain, but it's something else it's called. But anyway, so appropriation in the beginning is used for a purposeful or creative practice that reuses, references, copies, or reclaims other artworks or artists' visual materials. Appropriation has been used throughout art history in many ways. Most recently, it has become more widely understood for its cultural implications as the act of taking or using things from a culture that is not your own, especially without showing that you understand or respect this culture. And that's basically what we're going to be talking about today. And I'm going to kind of push some things a little bit in our conversation today, I think. And then it's also been used to contemplate history, reframe ideas, generate conversation, and produce new ways of thinking, exploring, and informing. So this next artist I'm going to show is one of my favorites. Her name is Alice Thorpe. She's a contemporary artist. She likes to appropriate kind of old images or famous images of art history into like contemporary people or things. So here are some examples of basically illustration work or design work that she has created to say things about contemporary issues. This is probably some of my favorite work of hers, where she's really speaking about women and their place in society and stuff. And again, I think some of the most popular reappropriated images over time has been the Mona Lisa and Marilyn Monroe. So it's just ironic that she has examples of both of those. So in the first image, she's appropriating Mona Lisa's body. And then the second one, she has Marilyn Monroe over Giselle's body. So does anyone want to comment about maybe what she's trying to say by appropriating these two images, or these images together? I mean, it's pretty self-explanatory, but.
A commentary on just the iconic nature of everything as well, I guess.
Mm-hmm. About Marilyn Monroe.
I think the juxtaposition of, that really skeleton body. And as you know, the aesthetic has changed for women, and Marilyn would have been considered fat now.
Right. And they look
Mm.
16, or 12 or something like that. But anyway, that would have been considered, obese in the modern world, right? Although it's changing. We're now starting to see full-figured model being used on the runways and being incorporated in a lot of ads now, which is really great. I know, like when I'm shopping for underwear, for instance, when I'm looking at the various sites that I shop from, like Victoria's Secret or Soma, they're now using a lot of full-figured models, which is really nice. I feel like I'm not excluded from purchasing those items. Got to talk about Banksy. We wouldn't do him justice by not including him in something about appropriation. And again, Mona Lisa pops up again. It's kind of like this theme. I thought I'd stick with Mona Lisa because it's kind of funny and fun. But here he has appropriated again Mona Lisa into these stencils. He's a stencil artist, street artist, and just kind of making some comments about culture, and he's always a riot. So here's another example of appropriation. Marcel Beauchamp, and I hope I'm saying that right. He's most famous for the urinal sculpture he has here on the left. So this idea, he called it ready-made or ready-maders is what he refers to, like objects that he finds that are already kind of ready to be made into art. And his idea of appropriation was just taking these random objects and then placing them on like a pedestal in a gallery space and giving them a whole new place and context. Some people might argue this isn't really art, but he's appropriating, putting it in a way that we have to speak about it and talk about it. And sometimes he adds a political element or and this piece he did with Mona Lisa. So he appropriated this object, which is a postcard of Mona Lisa that he found he added the mustache and then added the acronym LHOOQ, which I don't speak French, but it translates into she has a hot ass. So he's kind of playing off of, again, this sort of icon of Mona Lisa and how we worship her and look at her. We go to the Louvre and we appreciate her, and how we, idolize her. So, but he adds a mustache, which I think is really funny. So Picasso has been quoted to say the bad artists imitate, great artists steal. And it's a famous quote attributed to Picasso, referring to the fact that throughout art history, artists have found inspiration in the work of their predecessors. But people have also argued in Picasso's case that he is a white man from a European country that has colonized most of Africa, and he has basically appropriated imagery from art of Africa. And I had read this Black African artist was told that his art looks like Picasso's art, and he responded, no, Picasso's art looks like my art because it's his culture. So, and I just have this example of how Picasso has appropriated his style of cubism and borrowed it from African mask and African art that he researched and came across in his studies. So people could, a lot of people, I know people have argued with Picasso appropriating images from Africa and using it as his own. And it's gone on forever. And then ironically, Banksy took the quote, scratched out Picasso, and stole the quote. Made it his own.
That's hilarious.
Yeah, so there we go. So we have this sort of like coming around, and where Banksy has now stolen Picasso's own words and reappropriated them as his own. So I thought that was pretty fun. We're going to talk about Marilyn and go back to the Andy Warhol situation here. So, this when you are appropriating images in general, you have to kind of be careful because it can get you in trouble. And I'll have some other examples after this. But we actually have to ask the question here, like, who's really the owner of these images? Because Andy Warhol borrowed this photograph of Marilyn Monroe and reproduced it as these screen prints of Marilyn, these infamous images of Marilyn. The photograph was actually taken by Gene Corman, who was a photographer in the publicity department at 20th Century Fox. And this image, you could say he possibly is the owner of the image. However, Marilyn is not simply portraying herself in this image. She's portraying the character in the movie. I believe it's Avalanche. No, not Avalanche. What was it called? Oh, I can't remember the name of the movie all of a sudden. Anyway, she's playing a character. So this image is not even really Marilyn. It's Marilyn as somebody else, the character in the movie that she's portraying. And this image was used as a publicity image to sell the movie. So the question sometimes it can get a little gray, like, okay, well, is this really an image of Marilyn Monroe? Or is it her that needs to approve it? Is it 20th Century Fox? Is it the photographer? Like, so it can get a little gray. And I know, like, the question about copyright and all that, like, when is we reappropriate a lot of images from very old historical contexts because they sort of outdated their copyright time, right? And apparently, I just looked up the recent copyright law. I mean, it's kind of complex because before 1974, I believe it is, if something was created like in this year, it was copyrighted for 95 years after that, or 99 years after that. anything created after 1974 or it's like 73 or 74, something in the 70s, then it has a 70-year life, like a shelf life, basically. And then after that, it's like open and free domain to whoever wants to use it. So you're basically kind of protected for 70 years once an image or something is created. And it's filed as a copyright. So we're talking about like specific things that would be copywritten. However, there are some cases where I'm going to talk about a couple of cases here where appropriation has gotten an artist in trouble. So can anyone think of an example of that? Like in the last 20 years of an example of something that got an artist in trouble with appropriating images that didn't belong to them?
How about that thing at the Walker?
Oh, we're
Was-
going to talk about the Walker.
Yeah,
Mhm.
okay.
Any other examples? Okay, I got one for you. Maybe you remember the Obama poster.
Mm-hmm.
So, okay, so this poster was created by Shepard Fairey. And the problem with this is that, well, he got more in trouble for trying to cover it up than just admitting it. But he used an image from the Associated Press when he created this image. And it wasn't, I don't even think it was the photographer that was actually fighting him. It was the Associated Press because he made a lot of money off of, I'm not sure if he made a lot of money off this image in particular, but his businesses alone, because he was doing like fashion wear and things like that. But his business alone, after he created this poster for Barack Obama, he increased his profits by like over $1 million. So the argument is that if this poster went to put out, you know, he wouldn't have made those kind of profits and that sort of notoriety for the work that he did. But what really got him in trouble was that he tried to cover it up. And one of his employees ratted him out and said, no, here's some email proof that he tried to get rid of the evidence that he appropriated this from the Associated Press. So that's what he really got in trouble for. And he could have served prison time, but they ended up just giving him community service and stuff like that. But he did have to pay a fine for using a photograph that he did create himself. And I think it was like, I think $1 million or something that he had to pay or something like that. But he had to pay monetarily, and then he had to pay with his time with community service. He didn't have to go to jail over it. So yeah, you just gotta be real careful about the images that you appropriate. So Andy Warhol got in trouble. Okay, he appropriates a lot of images of people in his work. And in this piece, this actually happened after Andy Warhol had passed away. But this is a case of Andy Warhol's foundation versus Anne Goldsmith, who actually took the photograph of Prince for Vanity Fair. Vanity Fair gave permission to Andy Warhol to create an illustration with his, you know, stencil, not stencil, but his screen print style to create an illustration for an article about him in Vanity Fair. That all is fine and dandy. It's when Andy Warhol took that image and reproduced several more artworks that he showed in a gallery after the fact. So that's where the Andy Warhol Foundation kind of got in trouble. I haven't found the article of what was the outcome of that. I think they're actually still arguing it to this day. And I don't think the court has come with a decision yet, but this is just another example. Like, he got the permission. Again, I'm an illustrator, and oftentimes when you work as an illustrator and you have to do articles about like famous people or famous things, they are liable for providing you with the imagery that you would need or use to appropriate or to like paint from as a reference for your images. And they are responsible for that and get those special permissions for you. I have an artist friend. He's an illustrator, uses all collage work. He does collage, digital collage, and he just chooses to use all his own models. So he likes to use real like photographs of people like posing, and then he redraws them kind of in their positions of whatever the figure is doing in that illustration. And he actually outsources and hires his own models. So he looks for the models he wants, he hires them, he has them sit for him, he takes their pictures, and then he uses them, of course, with special, permission.
So I think that's so difficult when you want to draw a portrait of someone famous, but you can't go take a picture of someone famous. Like you have to use some kind of reference photo, and
Yeah.
then either you change it or whatnot. But yeah, you run the risk of getting in trouble. So
Yeah.
there was a professor at MCAT, an illustrator, and he did like collage work. So he would make a face with like 4 people's faces. He'd cut it up. Well, one time he made a piece for like World Traveler magazine, and the guy was a model and recognized himself in the image, called his agent and said, and so Tom was all worried that he was going to get in trouble. And the guy goes, "Do you have any more work for me? Can you use my face again?" So he thought he's going to get in trouble, but then the model just wanted more work.
That, and Tom was who I was thinking of.
Yeah.
Yeah, because Tom uses a lot of images, right? For
Yeah.
his collage work. So yeah, that is scary because that could potentially have gotten him in trouble. I mean, we don't know, because the problem with that is, and what they had to do, what the argument was with this Andy Warhol Foundation versus Ann Goldsmith, is they had to argue if I forget the wording, but it's something along the lines like, if the artwork being used in this context changes it from the original, and if it changes it enough to be completely different. So
Yeah,
it's
like
like
23% or something. It's really
yeah, it's like really, it's hard. I mean, it's hard to prove, it's hard to fight. I mean, it's hard to argue, it's hard to defend. I mean, yeah, it's just, and a lot of times when I'm researching images to use, I try to do royalty free when I'm doing my image search. That way that I know that most of the time those are going to be images that aren't being connected to somebody getting paid for it.
sure.
So this is the image, the photograph, and then the additional artwork he made. So this is the piece that they're actually arguing in court. And this is the original illustration he created for the Vanity Fair article. So this one is okay. This is the one they're fighting. And I guess several other ones. That's just one example. So here's some examples of cultural appropriation: using or creating art that only looks a part of a culture. Oh, and then I probably should ask that we mute if we're not talking. Just a little reminder. So using or creating art that only looks at a part of a culture, creating art that reinforces a stereotype about a group of people, getting positive attention when your art imitates artwork or themes from other cultures. And then in your art, avoid using culture elements in ways that give a false or incomplete view of a culture. They support stereotypes or are not the intended use of those elements. There's a conversation, a video that I have a clip later on. If we have time, we'll watch it. But there's a Native American, he's being asked, like, how does he feel about artists appropriating, or non-Native artists appropriating elements of Native American culture, like, for instance, a headdress, for instance. And this gentleman's response was, as he was cool with it as long as it was being used in the way that it was intended to be used. If you're using it in an inappropriate way, then he's got a problem with it. So like thinking about just like, even like the elements. So like thinking of what's in a headdress, like feathers, beads, fur, leather, things like that. And, he mentioned that like the elements, they're sacred when they're brought together, but may not necessarily be so sacred when you kind of pull the parts, take it apart. But he was kind of mentioning that, it just kind of depends. There's kind of, and I feel the same way as a Latino. Like, I think it just depends how it's being used. But really, the bottom line is, are you perpetuating a stereotype or a bias? Then there's a problem there, right? So I just have these little questions to ask yourself as an artist when you're appropriating images or any kind of cultural images, is just ask yourself, is this part of my own culture? If not, have I been invited to share it? And in my cases, I have been, because I want to respect that. Does this honor or imitate the culture? Do I understand the significance of what I'm doing? Does this support a stereotype that might hurt people from that culture? Have I seriously researched and learned about this culture, or do I have, or just have a basic understanding of things I like? For my research, did I use books, essays, or other works written by members of that culture? So these are just some easy questions to kind of ask yourself, just as like a checking point to see, like, if you're on the right track.
I think stereotypes are just so hard because some people, that's their culture, and some people are offended by certain stereotypes and some people are not offended by certain stereotypes. So then it ends up being like all the stereotypes are offensive. But then like how do you make the cultural things, respectful? So it's very, very difficult.
It is. I think it is. I think it's really, really hard. Especially if you're trying to make social commentary. I mean, well, that's what the next slide is going to be about. If you're making social commentary as a white person and you're appropriating something from a different culture, as like you're trying to advocate or support or be kind of a, you're just trying to make a point about something, and your intent is meant to be good, but it can come out really bad. And I think asking these questions is just going to help you maybe not get to that point. So I don't know if you guys heard about this painting, Open Casket, but it's a white artist. She made the painting in August of 2016 in response to media coverage of gun violence, in particular, Black men being shot by police. The portrait is based in part on a photograph of Timid Hill's, mutilated body. So the photograph the mom put out, Timid Hill's. And so she basically appropriated that image, repainting it, of course, making it her own. And then it was put on display. And it was the solo show was titled Waiting for the Barbarians. So it got a lot of pushback from the Black community. They didn't appreciate this painting, even so much that another artist protested by standing in front of it wearing a t-shirt that says Black Death Spectacle. So again, using the Black body as a spectacle. And we'll kind of get into this a little bit later too, with some film references that I bring up. So thinking about this, Candace Hopkins, who's a curator and a writer, she has written that appropriation can and often takes place when there are imbalances of power, when one attempts to represent the other. Artists are those who work to conjure debate and question the status quo of society. Yet that doesn't mean they have the inherent right to speak through, about, or for another's culture, history, or marginalization. So even though this artist had the intent, some would argue that she really shouldn't have made this artwork because she's, one, making a spectacle, but also she's not part of that culture to really speak about it. As a white person, I think she could probably create a painting that talks about her place in this role of police violence against Black men. Maybe not necessarily appropriating this image of Emmett Till, but maybe showing some other kind of side of it, like something from her personal experience as a white woman examining this taking place. Like, I feel that would probably be a better place for her to start instead of utilizing this other image. I don't know. What do you guys think? How do you feel about the painting? I'll put it back up.
I think it's very powerful and gets people to speak or talk about it, but or think. But I mean, you wouldn't know necessarily the skin color of the artist necessarily. If you just saw this painting, you wouldn't know. And so the fact that that matters, is the issue.
This came up a lot, as you know, Melody, during the murder of George Floyd, because so many artists felt compelled to express how they were feeling.
Yeah.
So to tell artists, no, no more of that. I don't know. That's
Yeah.
a slippery slope.
Melody, why don't you talk about your billboard you did for George Floyd's, in response to George Floyd? Didn't you have a billboard of a mother crying for their child? And were they African descent in the picture or in the painting, or was it like just generic?
Oh man, I've had so many confrontations about color and stuff that's in paintings, but well, the painting that I did for the billboard project, the social justice billboard project at George Floyd Memorial, the intersection of where he was murdered, I created a piece. It's called Mama, and it basically has 3 Black mothers crying, and they're all different skin tones, but the flag is upside down. Now, initially, nobody really had a problem with this image, and actually it's been really embraced by a lot of people in the community with this piece. Oh, actually, it's right in my background. See, it's right there. Do you see it? So, the biggest problem was not even just the color of the skin of the people. The advertiser or the billboard company had a problem with the flag being upside down. They were more upset about the patriotism, like the lack thereof. And then I told them, I was like, well, that's the military sign for the country's in distress. I mean, it's literally the military turns their flag upside down. So and I'm a military family. So I basically just argued that point. Like the reason for the upside down flag is to represent that the country's in distress, the nation's in distress, which it was. So, and that he called out for his mother, and then finding out that his mother had already passed away, that he was yelling for his mom, even knowing she wasn't really around. And I think just our innate nature is to call out for our mothers when we're in distress. So I kind of combined the two together. I had another mural project where ironically it was a Philando Castile kind of grant that was being paid for by the St. Paul, I think it was the St. Paul City Council or something like, or Chamber of Commerce, something like that. They were funding it, and the city of Falcon Heights, where Philando was murdered, they acquired this grant to do this sort of like community building kind of project. So they asked me to come in as a visiting artist to one of the Falcon Heights Elementary School and work with the 4th graders to create a mural using these funds. And the title of the piece is called Cultivating a Caring Community. And they literally wanted that written on the wall and yada, yada. So I talked to the 4th graders to find out what that meant to them, and so there's a lot of images of children of all races on the mural. And I mean, prominently brown, but that was kind of the point I felt of the grant. So, the principal, who's a white woman, complained that she got complaints from some of the parents saying that the mural doesn't represent the demographic of the building. Even the building is very equally racially dispersed. So if you're thinking of like demographics of like race, it's very diverse. That school is very diverse. And so I just thought it was a funny argument. So basically I had to white face 2 of the children in the mural, which while I was doing that, I was crying the whole time.
Wow.
So, and the kiddos came up to me and said, why are you painting over their face? They were so pretty before. And I was like, I know. I was like trying to hold back the tears. But yeah, that was pretty awful. So yeah, I mean, sometimes, the idea of who's painting, and sometimes you don't know who the painting is, but it still means something. Like You know, we talk about Picasso and how he appropriated African art. I can't tell you how many Black artists, like when they talk about who influences them, they're influenced by Pablo Picasso. So it's just interesting how it's like this full circle, right? So like, you know, Picasso, you know, appropriated from African culture, and then it gets back to like a North Side kid who grows up learning about art history and art and just still is in love with Picasso. I mean, I'll admit, I've loved Picasso since I was young too. Like I saw his work and I connected it with it automatically. And it possibly could be because he was using that iconography and that imagery to connect with my culture as well. Because the Latino community and culture is very blended with indigenous and Black culture with how we render images. So, you know, I don't know, you kind of go back and forth with this. I mean, this is why it's a difficult discussion and why so many articles and things are being written about it, because I mean, you could argue either way about any of these things, right? And it just makes
Right.
it challenging. And the dialogue is important to have.
Yeah, I was wondering if is there anyone who hasn't said anything that would like to comment?
Well, I've actually had artwork that was censored out of a show in Burnsville. It happened a few years ago. And it was really difficult, you know, for me to go through all this, especially I felt like you actually it's very triggering that you brought this topic up, because it's been very difficult waters to navigate even recently, because as you're talking about this white woman who painted that painting because she had feelings, you know, about she had emotions as an artist. That's what we do. Sometimes we paint from emotions and we feel like a nudging to have to bring it out. Sometimes we don't use our words. We use our creative gifts to want to communicate something. And a number of years ago, there was a young boy who was killed by police officers. He was trying to get into his, he was living with his grandmother. He was trying to get into his home. It was late at night, and his neighbors called the police because they thought he was trying to break into this home. And the police officers killed him, thinking that he had a gun. And my children are mixed race, and all they could think about is, you know, I often think about that with my sons, you know, how difficult and challenging it must be for them as they go out into our community. And at the time, the trigger words were qualified immunity. And so my painting depicted this young boy at the top. It was a diptych, and at the top of the diptych was this little boy who had nappy hair. It was a shadowing type effect, and his hands were up in the air, and he just had like, you know, when your hands are held out, you have 5 fingers, and the hand just looked like that, like he was pointing at something. But in the shadow looked like a man, and it looked like a man holding a gun.
Mm-hmm.
And in the boy's chest, in the little boy's chest, there was a image with all these circles that looked like bullet holes, and it was the letter Y, like kind of to imitate why me. But in the shadow of the man's chest, it was a peace sign, because, you know, as it's facing down in the shadow, because it was supposed to represent like a, you know, peace officers. We think of police officers as peace officers. And across the very top of the painting was like the yellow tape that police officers put after a crime scene. And then instead of it saying, you know, don't cross, or, you know, crimes, you know, a crime scene, it said qualified immunity. And over top of the entire painting, at the time, I had a quote by Crump. And it's, at the time, I didn't really realize the enormity of how much I mean, sorry, the impact that this would have. But, that was a few years after I had put this painting up for to be in this exhibit. That's when Philando got shot. And my whole point of including this in the show wasn't to bash the police. It was to have a conversation about, why this happened. So I didn't like make up this scenario. I didn't, it wasn't like a made up situation. It was something that actually happened in our news. And I was just putting a picture to a story, something so that people could have a visualization outside of what the news media puts out there, but a story picture that would maybe be more visual for people to see, a creative picture to have to start the conversation rolling. But instead, the powers that be, saw the painting and said, "Oh, no, 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 we're not going to have that in our show," and they censored it, out of the show.
What was their reason for censoring it?
They didn't give a reason. They said they didn't have to give a reason. And the weird thing is, it was for it was with the Burnsville Visual Arts Society, and oddly enough, the judge had already come through, and I actually was awarded a prize. But the president of the Visual Arts Society said she did not want it up there, and so the Ames Center manager called me at like 11 o'clock at night and said, "I'm sorry, Annie, they're telling me that you have to come and pick this up, and I need you to come here at 8 o'clock in the morning, and we have to have you take it down." So,
Wow.
and now fast forward, Burnsville has had 2 police officers and a EMT shot and killed. And there's been times where I felt like kind of labeled as a, anti-police individual in our in our city.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, community, because of this gal who ran the arts. And people that know me know that is not the case. I'm a huge volunteer with Beyond the Yellow Ribbon. The fire chief knows me. I always feel like I walk this fine line at times because of the poor light that this woman kind of placed upon me. And it's just, it can be difficult at times. And
Yeah, totally. And I think that's our job as artists, is that we walk that fine line. And so that's why we're trying to discuss what that fine line is and what's the safe side of the line for us and what's not. I mean, even going through the generations, and Barbara's lived through lots of protests about art and all that stuff. So we have to be respectful of the time here. We have a few minutes left. Sorry to cut you off, Annie, but I think we can talk about these last 2 opinions. And then Melodee, did you have any more slides after this that you needed to get?
Oh, I do, but it's okay. We can just kind of talk about these 2 opinions and kind of gauge. There was like a couple videos I was gonna show, but that's okay. I know we started late too, so.
Yeah, I mean, you can take like 5 more minutes and finish up if you'd like.
Yeah, so I just prompt these 2 kind of opinions and ask like maybe where you feel you lie, or maybe we're in between them. But the first opinion basically just thinks that artists should simply appreciate the styles, techniques, and subject matter of other cultures and not appropriate them. Just appreciate them, but don't put it in your work if you don't belong to that culture. So there's that one opinion. You just avoid it, don't use it, don't do it, just appreciate it from the sidelines. But opinion 2 said artists should be able to create whatever they want, even if it offends others. The attitude behind opinion 2 is that opens up a can of worms in their opinion as far as to censorship. Because if we start censoring who can do what and communicate what they want to communicate in their work, then that answer, it opens up that can of worms of like extra censorship. I think I kind of fall in between both these opinions. I think it just sort of depends on the circumstance. I will speak on one thing as a student at MCAD. we had to illustrate in one of my illustration courses. We were given I think like 2 words or 1 word. I can't remember, but the assignment was we were given a word. I just remember the word was ice, and we had to do an illustration based on ice. And this white male student created an illustration of a black baby with like an afro, naked, so showing his penis, a black baby with an afro, and like all this gold, like all this diamond bling on him. I was offended immediately when I saw that image. And I was probably more offended as to why it had to be a black naked baby to show ice. Like, why couldn't you just draw on a wrapper? You know, because a wrapper, like I could have seen just him drawing a wrapper with some bling on, maybe a grill that maybe said ice on it or something like that. But the fact that he had a black baby naked with his penis out, with all these, like the chains on it, with an afro, I just felt it was very offensive. And nobody was addressing it in the whole critique. Now, granted, MCAT is a very dominantly white institution, not only just by the student body, but it's the teachers as well. And nobody was bringing this up and I was just fuming the whole time. And I voiced my opinion, and I said I was very offended. Now, should it be censored? You know, I don't know. I as a publisher, there's no way in hell I would publish that. You know, as an art director, I wouldn't use it. But again, who's to say, that's where this argument comes in. So, where is your opinion on this? Like, I think I'm in the middle, but in that case, I absolutely was like, no way, you don't get to do that.
I think I'm in the middle, and I think that as long as you can defend your work with respect, like, yes, I studied this culture, yes, this was what I was asked to do, or I do this out of respect and inspiration, and yeah, we all make mistakes, and like Barbara always said, assume good intentions.
Yeah.
There's an artist that does a lot of Native American work, and he's like Ukrainian, but Native American people have commissioned him because he's just so good at what he does. And
Yeah.
so, but I'm sure there's some Native American people who are like, I can't believe he's making this art, So I think, but as long as he can justify it with, well, these people like it, and I'm being respectful, and I studied, I think it's okay if you do have like a defense and that you are being respectful.
Yeah, I'm concerned, this is Barbara,
Yeah.
about where this might go, because if I'm going to be restricted to only using cultural iconography from my own culture, so I'm English, I'm Scottish, I'm Franco-American, and I'm American Indian from Maine. So does that mean I can do, let's see, thistles, fleur-de-lis? I mean, is this all I can do in my artwork? Because I'm not down with that. I am not down with that. Also, I'm concerned that a lot of times this is about power and money.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and I get that. If I started making dream catchers and selling them out at some crafts fair, not okay.
Yeah.
Right. But I also, the topic of my doctoral research, you have to research this teeny tiny little question, was there anything common across all cultures in terms of their iconography? Like, all cultures, is there anything? And there was. All cultures created patterns. And I had an anthropologist, and we discussed why that was. And I came to the hypothesis that we as humans love patterns because we have these great big brains. We want to think we're in control of our own destiny, right? And so that's why we love patterns in dance and music and in visual, because we know what's coming next. It makes
Mm-hmm.
us feel comfy, right? So I had
Paul has
somebody,
his hand raised. I'm sorry,
Yeah.
Barbara, you're done.
yeah, let me just say one more sentence. So I'm concerned that we're going to get ourselves to a place where we're going to hamstring everybody making anything.
Yeah.
And where does that leave social justice art? We want to provoke discussion. Where does that leave that?
Yeah.
So, okay, Paul, I yield to you.
Thanks. Sorry, I was unmuted there. I thought I must have pushed it accidentally and invited you into this noisy lobby. Anyway, just real quickly, I come down firmly on the side of artists being able to express themselves fully and completely, and I like assume good intentions. I would say for me, assume authentic intentions. And yeah, a lot of times artists intend to offend, and sometimes offense needs to be made to certain groups who, like especially that painting with Dana Schultz, the open coffin. I feel she completely had the right to make that painting. Her race shouldn't matter in the statement that she was making about social justice. That's the point of the painting. It's all about the context, and I disagree with the idea that you have to check and see what your race is before you decide to make statements about what happens in this world to people who are marginalized or victimized. On the other hand, I also want to say everyone has the right to be offended, and everyone has the right to speak out and say that they're offended. And whether it's an individual or groups offended by a piece of artwork that's been made, they can speak to that and cry out, and it can go as far as it goes. And if they sway other people to feel the same way, that's fine. Then it's up to the artist to defend what they did and why they did it. I mean, and also artists have the right to make mistakes. But yeah, I feel an artist's primary duty is to express themselves regardless of who it may or may not offend. Because for every person who's offended, there will be a person who really appreciates deeply that piece of art. If it's a valid statement, if it's not, misogynistic or nihilistic or something that's against humanity. I mean, we would all vilify a person who created a piece of art like that, and then that person would have to accept those consequences. And if they invited that sort of response and that's what they want, I don't think we should stop them. I don't think any society should stop any artist from saying what they need to say, whether we agree with it or not.
So do you think the scaffold piece should have been demolished?
I don't know if I saw the scaffold piece. I'm sorry. Which one was
It's on
that?
the screen. It's on the screen now. This is the sculpture that was acquired by the Walker by Sam Durant. And he had basically created 3 gallows combined together. Gallows that represented slaves, natives, and some other group that was hung.
I think I remember this piece. I would simply say that for good or bad, the artist has the right to create that piece of work. And if our society doesn't agree with it and wants to take it down, they have the right to do that as well. We should all have the freedom to express ourselves in one direction or the other. And I don't think that, cultural appropriation is a wrong thing. I'm not saying that I disagree with cultural or that I agree with cultural appropriation, but again, it's context. If someone's doing it simply to make a buck, that's going to show. And that's what I started with authenticity at the beginning of this. If the person's heart is in their work and they're making the statement that they believe in, whether I agree with it or not, they have the right to make that, and I have the right to dislike it, hate it, write a piece about it, and say everything that I believe it is. And if I think it's social or social cultural appropriation, I have the right to say that, and they have the right to defend it or not. But
was this a permanent?
dialogue.
Is this a permanent installation, or was it?
It was, but it was taken down. So they decided, after having conversations with the Native community and the community at large, they decided to destroy it. And then they had like a ceremonial burial of the pieces. I think they like burned it and then they buried it. And there's articles of the artist saying that he never felt censored, that he respected it, the decision, and that's kind of where they left it.
Wow.
So just to give you some context, this was a replica of the gallows that they used in Mankato. There was a massacre there. Okay.
Wow.
So that was a replica. So that was what he was trying to get talked about. And I think I read his responses to Melodee, and he said, well, I got it talked about. Right.
Yeah. I mean, his intention was a historical one. That was, he just wanted to give historical context to like what has happened. And yeah, I don't know. it was a big to-do, and I know the Native people, I mean, were really offended by it, which I don't blame them, to be honest with you. I think it was a big snafu on the Walker side to even think about thinking this was okay.
Let's go
Um,
back, Melody, and remind me why the Native Americans were offended.
Because Abraham Lincoln approved for, what was it, 48 Native men to be hung in Mankato.
I think their
Well,
big
I remember
concern
the
was that
crime.
San Durant isn't native, Melody. That
He's
was the
not, he's
problem.
white.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that was the problem, that
yeah,
he
he's a
wasn't
white
native.
man.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But what I don't understand is how come they did not have someone also on that project that was Native American to even also be a consultant?
A
Because-
good question.
Well, this happened a long time ago, and that it wouldn't happen now, Melody, because we've progressed, right?
Yeah, this didn't happen too long ago, though. This was like,
No, this was recent. This is
this was like
within-
20, this was like 2016, 2017.
right. Yeah, this isn't all that long ago.
Yeah.
This is the same as the open coffin thing. It's a person who feels outraged and hurt by a crime that was committed on a human being and wanted to make a statement about it. I'm really sorry that the Native American community didn't want someone from outside their community making the statement. But again, this isn't just an artist who saw something that they hated and wanted to bring it back to our attentions. And I think it should be brought back to our attention. And I'm glad that it was
Yeah.
with that piece
I
of
don't
art.
know.
And
I don't know if his intent was really that, though, based on what I've read and like Barbara, I
Okay.
mean, you
No.
can probably agree with me.
No.
Like I didn't get the intent that he was doing this on behalf of, or I think
Oh.
No.
I think
Okay.
he
No.
was trying to
Yeah, so-
stir
context is
emotions,
everything.
and that's probably
Context
why
and
he was
intention.
cool with destroying it.
Yeah,
Um,
exactly. Exactly.
Yeah.
I have one thing to add to this. This is Anna. Sorry, I'm still sick, which is why I don't have my video on. But
Don't worry, honey.
I want to just add this, which kind of dovetails just a little bit, but just like it's like freedom of speech. Anyone can say whatever they want, but they are not free from the consequences of that.
Exactly. Thank you.
You can scream fire in a theater, but you're not going to be free of the consequence of doing so. You can call
Right.
anybody the N-word, but you're not going to be free of the consequences. So you can paint anything you damn well please, but you're not necessarily going to be free of the consequences of that choice if it's cultural appropriation. So that's all I really want to say about it.
Well said.
Thank you, Anna.
And if you're, willing to take that chance, right?
Right.
I took a long way around to say what you just summed up, Algamis. Thanks for that. I can use that next time if I'm not appropriating it from you. Just a very simple way of saying freedom of speech is really tantamount in our society, especially now with all the misinformation and disinformation that's being disseminated everywhere every minute.
And cancel culture, which I mean, that might be a whole kind of conversation we need to have too.
That'll be
Oh,
next
yeah.
year. We'll do that next year, Melody. You're coming back.
Cancel culture. Oh man. Yeah, I just want to close. There was quite a bit more I wanted to talk about, but that's okay because we had a really good conversation, I feel. But I just want to close by showing this artist because he's pretty dope. He's a native artist from Canada, and he recreates masks,
Mm-hmm.
native masks using Air Jordans. So I thought he does these sculptures with Air Jordans.
That's expensive.
Yeah, right? I don't
yeah.
even know how he can afford it, but I read this little clip about it. He said his fascination began in the 90s on a trip to New York City when he saw Air Jordans lined up at a Nike store in a museum-like display case. This is him quoting, I had actually that same day been at the Museum of Natural History, and I saw a lot of indigenous artwork that's kind of still in the realm of the science museum. And that was kind of unsettling for me because he saw the artwork in this sort of context or space of like study of science. And he was like seeing how those objects became fetishized and held up as specimens of nature rather than being put into an art museum. And that got him thinking about how often objects are treated in a very different way, like putting sneakers behind glass. So that's where that idea came from and how he created these sculptures, which I thought was really, really dope. So I wanted to share that with you.
Super cool. Hey, well, thank you so much, Melodee. This was so great to have this discussion. We have recorded it, so for those who want to tune in, they'll be able to. I'm going to stop the recording.